And my husband is coming to this in another room. So if I say, hey, Brent, bring me some wine, you can come and refill me. It's fine. Kira.
Hello, everyone.
And Meg. Oh, and Sabrina.
Rachel is very happy to see you folks entering the room, as am I. My name is Michael. I'm the events coordinator and publicist at Annie Bloom's. Thanks for joining us. For those of you who aren't familiar with the store or maybe on a totally different coast, we're located in the heart of Multnomah Village in Southwest Portland, Oregon. We've been around for 43 years now, and we are still going strong. We're open on weekdays from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. and weekends from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. Our website is always open. You can shop day and night at annieblooms.com. And we would encourage you to go to the link that I'm about to put in the chat here, where you can buy tonight's book from us. We offer curbside pickup and in-store pickup, a couple of different shipping options. Oh. Yeah, it is that book that Mark's holding up right there. Love and Jazz. and local delivery in the general Portland area. We've got some great events coming up after this one. Tuesday, March 29th at 7 p.m. We have a couple of middle grade authors, one of whom is local to Portland. That is Sonia Thomas. And she'll be reading with Ernesto Cisneros. Sonia's brand new book is Sir Fig Newton and the Science of Persistence. On Monday, April 4th, local authors PC and Kristen Cast will be reading from their brand new book, Omen's Bite. The following night, another Portland author, Caroline Kurtz, her new memoir, Today is Tomorrow, will be the day after that one. Let me admit another person here. Tonight, we have Portland author Mark MacDonald and his sister and co-author Rachel Elliott reading from their memoir, Love and Genetics, which is published by Portland's own Unsolicited Press. We're gonna admit their publicist in here now, as well as someone else. Hi, Deb. And another person. People keep coming, this is great. Fill up the room.
I do know a couple people that might be coming late, so if you could let them in.
I'll keep looking for those, yeah.
I'd appreciate it.
So there's gonna be a reading and conversation. There'll be a Q&A at the end. Feel free to type questions into the chat and I'll be happy to read them out loud. You can also hit the little blue hand icon that's down in the reactions menu there and ask a question live on screen if you dare. Mark MacDonald is an adjunct professor at Portland State University and a principal engineer at Intel Corporation. He has authored more than 40 scientific publications for which he has received multiple awards, including the Martin Hirschhorn Best Paper Prize from the International Acoustics Congress. Cool. In 2010. And Rachel Elliott.
So specific.
In 2010. Rachel Elliott grew up in the prairies of Alberta, Canada, yet somehow miraculously finds herself living outside of Raleigh, North Carolina, and became a US citizen in 2016. Also very specific. She works in mortgage lending and is a voracious reader. Everyone, please welcome Mark and Rachel.
Thank you so much for being here with us. For those of you who have only met one of us, I am Mark's sister, Rachel, and this over there is my brother, Mark. Love and Genetics is a book that we are here to celebrate tonight. The official launch is officially a labor of love. More than a decade ago, when Mark first suggested writing our story down, I thought it would be a personal memento, maybe with a Google Doc that we emailed to our families. But it never crossed my mind that it might grow to be this, what is happening tonight. Over the years, Mark would ask me if I was writing anything for our book, and I would say, oh, no, I totally forgot. I'll write something this weekend, I promise, it'll be great. And eventually, he stopped asking and would just send me emails that said, Pester, Pester. And if I got a Pester email, I knew it was time to get off my butt and write another chapter, pull up another memory, and write something down. And it's Mark's persistence that brought us here tonight. And I will always be grateful for his encouragement, his unannoying encouragement, which is what big brothers are for.
Yes, everybody that knows me knows how stubborn I am. So
I first met Mark when I was 30 years old, and he is my full-blooded big brother. Before that moment, he didn't even know I existed. Love and Genetics follows the story of our meeting and the remarkable impact that it had on both of our lives. In a time when the world is very dark and every interaction seems precarious and fraught with risk, I really believe this book is not just our personal story, but it's also a reminder that sometimes life's surprises are beautiful. There is love at work in the world, and I believe that. It lights little candles and huge beacons, and we need to be reminded of that. I mean, I do all the time. And so I hope that you get a little sense of that light tonight from being here.
Thanks, Rachel. Do you want to start with a reading?
Oh, I have like nerves. Yes, I will absolutely start with the reading. So I can't see myself when I'm doing the reading, so if it looks dumb, I don't really care. Cheers. Thank you all for being here. It actually truly means a lot. My baby brother and I were driving to get pizza during Thanksgiving of 2006. There are only so many times you can eat turkey in a 2-day period before you need something that's not turkey. As we've grown, Vincent, my baby brother, has become one of my best friends. He is a tall and handsome boy, brash and funny and gentle all at the same time. He was studying at the University of Kentucky at the time, and while we drove into town, we were lamenting the way our parents' relationship had devolved into what seemed like one long bicker. Mom and dad were becoming mom versus dad, at least a little bit. Truthfully, what had driven us from the house, even more than the leftovers, was the battle of the snap. We had been playing poker over taco chips and wine. I innocently noted, while lamenting my own diminishing pile of nickels, that Dad snapped his cards with a certain smug vigor as he displayed his winning hand one card at a time. Snap, 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 full house. My comment was met with raucous agreement, and as the conversation escalated both in volume and wine-driven silliness, a voice rose up from the other side of the room. I hate it when your father snaps cards. It reminds me of when we were young. One long bicker. Growing up, we had largely experienced our parents as a team, a couple who loved steadily through the years of raising a family, while Dad preached on Sundays and Mom managed a one-income household with resourcefulness. So as silliness turned serious and card snapping brought up long dead topics like gambling debts we had never heard of, we got unsettled. There were clearly things we didn't know about. Man, it's good to get out of the house, he sighed as we turned out of the driveway, probably a little too full of wine to be driving. Mom and Dad are making me crazy. Cautiously, into the dark, I said, I know. They push each other's buttons a lot. We made it to the top of the hill before I chanced, I think they've got things they need to talk about, you know? No doubt. Pause, signal, right-hand turn. What do you mean? Oh, nothing. Hastily, I tried to backpedal. It's just you can't be married for 30 years and not have things to work through, that's all. Why? What do you think I meant? He just shifted in his seat, adjusting the rearview mirror as we cruised along Jessamine Station Road. What do you know, Vincent? Why? What do you know, Rachel? The car fell meaningfully silent. I leaned forward in my seat, unable to keep the words from tumbling out of my mouth. Can you keep a secret? Who would I tell? No, really, you have to swear to me. You have to. I was about to make him promise his firstborn child when he stopped the car short of the beckoning neon of Little Caesars and looked me quizzically in the eye under the glow of the parking lot lights. Is this about our secret brother? It had been 6 years since the first revelation from my mother, and now I was sitting in the front seat of my baby brother's 1991 Honda piece of crap in the middle of the parking lot of Little Caesars, home of the hot and ready, finding out that he knew. My whole world shifted again, and I was stunned. Yes, I am talking about our secret brother, I yelped at him. What the hell? You know? Vincent was disappointingly matter of fact, probably already thinking about pizza. Mom told me a couple years ago when I was moping about being the black sheep of the family. She was like, "You think you're the black sheep of this family? You have no idea." He grinned at me widely. So she told me that her and Steve had a baby before they were married. We have a secret brother. Cool, right? This is how conversations went with Vincent. But he was right. It was cool. The drive home was too short. The hot pizza burned my lap as we wandered back and forth where he was, what he was like, who he was. With only 3 minutes or so to speculate, we arrived at the conclusion that no matter what, he was probably a spectacular human being, much like ourselves. Intelligent, handsome, charming, and funny, definitely. Our conversation bounced around the car like a helium balloon, inflated with the sheer happiness of the idea of him. We sat in the driveway outside our parents' house, my burning lap notwithstanding, and agreed that we wanted to find him. I told Vincent I had looked into it. I wrote a letter to Oprah, I confessed. He barked out a laugh. You dummy, are you kidding me? Did you get anything back? I shrugged. No, just a form letter. I started trying to look online, but it's so much more complicated than I thought it would be. I surrendered. Our conversation was halted by the front door opening. Dad called out, "What's going on out there? Bring in the pizza already, would you?" For the rest of the night, our secret brother was like a silk thread of a spider's web between us. He would catch my eye and raise an eyebrow like he does, or smirk, and I knew he was thinking about this older brother we had never known. Before that night and our short, honest trip to Little Caesars, I sometimes wondered if I'd imagined the whole conversation with her. She never mentioned it to me again after that first night. Over the years, the reality of my secret brother faded into the idea of him, which faded even further until all I had was a vague tickle in the back of my mind from time to time. But not anymore. Vincent and I sat around the house that night, fat and happy with knowledge, eating pizza and probably snapping our cards with self-satisfaction. He was out there, and we finally each had someone to talk to about the questions and hopes we were holding on to. I'm not sure we knew in that moment exactly what we were hoping for, but it grew to be this. He was real, and we were going to find him. The end.
Thanks, Rachel. All right. I'm not sure I can match that delivery, but I will do my best with another section from the book. My reading is a portion of the early exchanges between Marilyn and I. Marilyn is my biological mother and Rachel's mother. And the exchanges are one of the key things that we feature in the book. We include some of the original correspondence as we met one another for the first time. I hope Marilyn is here. I don't see the whole participants list, but I think she's with us tonight. At this point in the chronology that I'll be reading, we haven't met yet in person, but we have exchanged both messages and photos with each other. In addition to what's called the non-identifying information that was shared through the Canadian adoption services. So essentially, non-identifying information is a brief self-description and a medical history, and it's kept on file with the adoption services in Canada and is provided to inquiring birth mothers or adoptees that are searching more information like a medical history. The chapter begins. I got home from work one day that spring and found a small brown envelope from Marilyn in our mailbox. She had sent me an email warning a couple of days prior that a package was coming. I nested the envelope among the pile of other mail that I collected from the box and brought it into the house along with my work bag and a few groceries that I had stopped to pick up on the way home. It had been a typical day at the office, meetings, phone calls, analysis. But now I was home and it was time to walk the dog, unwind a little, and start to think about what to do for dinner. I dumped the groceries. I dumped the groceries and the mail in a pile on the kitchen island counter. Then I picked up the brown envelope and placed it deliberately aside, face up and aligned with its edges true to the black granite tiles of the countertop before turning back to the detritus of other mail and perishable food items that really ought to be sequestered away into the fridge for safekeeping. I paused for a moment and heard only my breath. Then I slowly began to unpack the groceries, working mechanically, carefully. Each individual item was placed into its correct location in the pantry or fridge until all were stowed. It was a surreal dance that moved with the languid purposefulness of a celestial orbit. To this day, I don't know whether it was avoidance or the thrill of building anticipation that was guiding my behavior that day. As I worked, I would steal glances at the brown envelope with my name on it. With the groceries put away, I turned next to the pile of other mail, sorting through one by one until all were placed in the recycling. Then I stood alone in our quiet home. Tina was still on her way home from work. It felt like there was some sort of slim journal or notepad inside that envelope. I opened the seal trepidatiously. I could now sense Marilyn's emotional baggage glowing through the brown paper wrapper. This was not what I'd been looking for. I had no real interest in resolving her issues. I just wanted to know my roots, my siblings, and the potential future of my genetic line. I pulled the notebook out of the envelope and a yellowed piece of folded paper came free and wafted to the floor like a kite without a string. I picked up the paper and unfolded it. It was a letter from the Children's Aid Society of Metropolitan Toronto. It was addressed to Miss Marilyn Christie, and it read, "Dear Marilyn, I'm glad to be able to tell you that Stephen's adoption was finalized last year. And though the social worker who placed him has left the agency, I have her notes, which she left on the record. She described him as a bright child. He was a bit fretful for the first month after he was placed with his adoptive parents, but when he settled down, he became a happy, responsive child. He's big, solid, and all boy. He was doing well when the adoption was made final. I think I told you that his new father is a professional person, and both he and his wife are the kind of people who can give stimulation to a child. They were experienced parents when Stephen was placed with them. Apparently, all the relatives and friends were very much attracted to Stephen too. I hope what I can tell you will help, Marilyn, as you think about Stephen. Give my regards to Stephen Sr. You have my very best wishes for happiness in your coming marriage. Yours sincerely, Miss E. Lemon." I put the letter down on top of the now empty envelope and turned to the notebook. A small, plain scratch pad of lined paper tied up in a simple straw ribbon. About 25 pages total, with the first half dozen already ripped out. I untied the ribbon and lifted the mahogany brown cover page. Inside, with several pages of handwriting, I discovered a typed cover letter on a plain 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. It was a letter from Marilyn. "Mark, this little package is necessary for me to do this connection rightly. I have no idea what you need or want to hear this story the way I can tell it. After we connected, but before I saw your picture, I went alone to a retreat center, my personal refuge, and sat for hours by a pond and thought and cried and wrote. What I wrote is enclosed in this notepad. It is a first draft, very messy, but I choose not to refine it. The story is ragged, so be it." I have huge reservations sending this to you. I don't want to impose on you what you might not want to receive, but this has been in my heart to say since January 1973. To help you, I found a picture of me taken when I was 16, shortly after your birth. This is the girl who held you when you were born. This is the girl's heart that you heard as a lub-dub when your ears first comforted the sound. Somehow I thought it might help if you had a face to connect to the story, making it maybe more real. The first half of the story, as I reread it, is really written by this girl. To say it is a story of a life and death struggle is not to overdramatize, but also it is a story of beauty out of context. Your life and mine are and were beautiful. Our story, Steed's and mine, is not a story of a sordid life. There were no drugs or alcohol, no abuse or mental illness, no promiscuity. He was a disciplined athlete and I was a vital girl. Your birth was not celebrated in a beautiful way except in this girl's heart, until at last you were with your adoptive family. And may I say, I love that I've seen their faces in your wedding picture. And then your chances really began. The second half of what I've written as I reread it, and this was not conscientiously planned, is from me now. It is from my heart for you as a man today. Maybe that's what I'm dreading sending you. I want you to know that what I've written is very deep, very true to who I am and how I process life, but in no way presumes that you need me in any way or even need to hear what I say. I just once have to say it. So this is sort of my caveat, to say that for me, this is an important piece of knowing and being known, but also to affirm that this is not where I want to stay, not what I want to dwell on. I guess, frankly, I fear your rejection. So, because so much is at stake, here it is. Handwritten at the bottom of that last page was, "This is very good," signed Marilyn. I moved on to the handwritten pages of the notebook itself. And unfortunately, tonight in this event, we don't have time to read the entire journal from Marilyn, but in it, she describes the experiences of my birth and adoption. She also explained the aged letter from the Children's Aid Society that was enclosed. She wrote, "There was a period of time when a birth mother could change her mind and reclaim the child. I knew that. It made everyone nervous. I also knew I would never do that. I had to be fierce too to survive. I wrote 2 letters to the adoption agency during the time before the adoption was final. I had to hear if you were okay. I received only one reply, which I have kept these 34 years. I think to prove to myself that you were real and not a dream. I'm sending it to you. I don't need it anymore." Her story was one of heartbreaking bravery. As a 16-year-old, she had moved into a home for girls in Toronto and was left to navigate the experience more or less completely alone. The more I read, the more I connected myself to this lonely girl's experience, slowly comprehending that this was my story too. I was sobbing quietly well before I finished reading. And by the time I was done, my body racked as I doubled over, staggered by the words she had written. Tears coursed mercilessly from my eyes. I have not cried like that before or since. Even as I stood there, shaking, I was not entirely sure why I was crying. It was a half hour before I could compose myself. Clearly, I had more emotional issues connected to being adopted than my mind had let on. I took a deep breath, braced myself for the journey yet to come, and set about making dinner for Tina and myself, trying to find some comfort in the ordinary. Later that night, I struggled. I struggled emotionally, not being able to share the contents of the envelope with Tina, my closest partner in life. And I struggled to find a response that I could send to Marilyn, though I knew she'd be waiting on one desperately. And And that's the end of that. Michael, does anybody have any questions on the chat or otherwise that they'd like to forward?
No questions yet, no. Are you guys ready for the Q&A? We're just taking a pause here.
I think we're ready for the Q&A unless,
Okay.
Unless anybody has a request.
So quiet.
Any questions? Any questions?
Oh, come on, Megan. I know you have a question.
You gotta give me a chance to type.
As I mentioned before, in the reactions menu, there's also a little hand icon that you can click on if you want to ask a question on video.
So I see one that says talk about your reunion. Is that like when
Yes.
we met?
I guess.
So I completely would disregard for what anyone else wanted. Was like, this is the last time I get to be the oldest sibling. I get to pick Mark up from the airport. We were going to meet on Memorial Day long weekend for the very first time. And I was like, I'm the oldest, I'm going, nobody can come with me. He belongs to me. I got real bitchy about it.
For context,
so-
this is the first time we were going to meet, and Marilyn and Steve were hosting an all-family get-together to
Yes.
try to introduce me to the whole clan at one time. And I had flown out to Kentucky, well, landing in Cincinnati, which was an hour's drive from where they lived in Kentucky.
Anyone who has spent any time with one of us knows that spending time with all of us is a lot. And so Mark was very bold to come and do this. So I said, I will pick him up from the airport. And I had said, I don't want you to wear a funny hat. I don't want you to put a flower in your lapel. I'm just going to know you. I'll know you. I mean, I just will. I know I will. And sure enough, I did eventually. He came down the jetway and I was like, oh my gosh, you're real. I love you. Welcome here. And he was like, oh, shoot, what have I done? But when we were driving home, like he said, it's like an hour from Cincinnati to Lexington, a little over an hour. And I was unfamiliar with the roadway. And it was 2007. So it was pre-Waze and I didn't have a smartphone. So I had like MapQuest directions printed out in the dark. And I was so distracted by the joy of having Mark and Tina in the car that I almost sideswiped people. I missed a turn and we ended up having to do a huge loop. Remember, we had to do the huge loop all the way around Lexington, Mark, because I missed the turn.
I thought you were giving us a tour.
I was giving you a tour of a city in the dark that I didn't live in. It's like, hey, guess what? Guess what? This one time? Oh, also when I was a kid, like it was terrible. It was terrible and unsafe. Someone else should have done it. And I just couldn't stop talking and I couldn't stop looking at him and I wasn't watching the road and I was speeding and slowing down. And I took all of our lives into our hands. He almost didn't get to meet the family because I did not do good. I did not do a good job, but it was very joyful for me.
You got me there. And you did come very aggressively with your hug in the airport. And my friends out here on the West Coast and my family in Toronto will know that I'm not really a hugger, so I'm not sure how I responded to that in the moment.
Bravely, you were a brave boy.
I was a brave boy. It was a really interesting experience being introduced to the whole family simultaneously in person. It was this whole group of people that were still essentially strangers to me. I hadn't known they existed for 6 weeks. And yet they shared mannerisms, they shared personality traits, sense of humor. They were all loud, wisecracking, big voice people. It was
Demure, quiet, shy.
I was a little shy, but given the situation, I mean,
No,
that's
I'm
probably.
talking about us. We
Oh.
were demure and quiet.
Oh yeah, nobody has ever said that about anybody in the Elliott gene pool, I don't think. But it was amazing how comfortable it felt. I'd never experienced such a sense of belonging or comfort among a group of people, let alone people that were largely strangers at that point. Any other questions in the chat?
Rachel answered one, which was Meg was wondering how long you talked before you met in person, and apparently 6 weeks.
Not long. It was
No,
fast. It was really,
Yeah.
really fast.
it's exciting.
We don't,
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
no, it's okay. We're not wallflowers. We don't wait.
Yeah. Norman Silver has a question. Did you ask questions about having brothers and sisters as you were growing up? Probably for Mark.
I had very little information. So the sum total of the information that was left to me as an adopted child regarding my birth mother was just a single index card worth of facts, like basic height, weight, size, a couple of comments on interest, and that was essentially it. And when I was adopted, Marilyn was still only 16 years old. So, the marriage hadn't taken place. There was no siblings at that time. There was no, apparently there was a marriage planned, but I only found that out after I met Marilyn. And so there was no reason to think of anything. And I have a brother in my adoptive family, Neil, who is my brother and the one I grew up with. So it never, my life felt so normal that being adopted was just another fact about me, that it would, it's like my hair color, my eye colors, I'm adopted versus it was just a fact about me that didn't mean much either way. And I never really gave it any consideration until Tina and I were facing the challenges around having children and thinking about maybe adopting ourselves and looking into surrogacy.
We have more questions streaming in here from Susan Elliott. Mark, as a scientist, did this situation get you thinking about nature versus nurture?
Oh, absolutely. So, I've always found math and science has come to me fairly easily. And, I envisioned meeting these siblings after I knew they existed and being able to say, hey, you should all be in the sciences. It works so easily for people with our brain type. And then I realized after I got to know them that they were all, they shared the personality trait and the intellect, but it was reflected in very different ways, that they had entirely different skill sets. And
thank you for saying that we have any skills at all.
The one comment that I there's two comments. So I think I've got a lot of the Elliott emotional bigness, but my parents, Jim and Liz, are more of the quiet, thoughtful, intellectual type. And I think that being raised in that home has suppressed isn't the right word, but maybe balanced or tempered the Elliott genes a little bit. And both Tina will probably not forgive me for saying this, but I think Tina has said outright that she would never have married me if I was raised by the Elliots, because I would just be too much for her. So I thank my parents.
Fair.
I thank my parents for that, for sure. And in the year that followed that meeting, we talked about meeting in Kentucky. Two wonderful things happened. One was 3 months after that meeting in Kentucky, Rachel volunteered to be a surrogate for Tina and I, which is what the second half of the book is about. And another thing that happened is that Vinny, our younger brother, invited himself to Christmas at the Mcdonald home in Toronto, which was a crazy experience. So he met my parents, Jim and Liz, before anyone else, and was the big, loud, untempered version of me, lovely in all his ways. But I remember my father saying, I can't imagine raising two of you. And I could empathize with that. There's a lot there.
Deb Jane wants to know, so once you decided to find your brother, what was your process to find him?
So my process was miraculous because I surrendered. I mean, it's an impossible task. The bureaucracy is out of control. Oprah did not help me. And so I left him to the ether. I used to imagine that I would be able to recognize him at the mall or an airport, or I'd be like, he's out there somewhere. I guess that's enough. It's fine. But I wish I could know him someday. And then one day he found us. Like, it was Easter weekend, and my mom came to our house and said, do you remember that one time I told you you have a secret brother? And it was like, yes, actually, I do. I do remember that one time you told me that. And she said, you found us. And like, my mind was blown, and I was so overwhelmed. And I was like, okay, great. Where is he? Is he coming? Are we having Easter dinner together? Is he here? Is he on the way? What's the plan? And she was like, no. That's not how this works. Like, he found us. He gets to decide if you ever get to talk to him. And that seemed incredibly unfair. That was very not cool that someone else got to decide if I got to talk to my big brother. Fortunately, he's a lovely human who eventually decided yes, but he found us. He did the work. I just sat there and wished that I knew him. And then all of my wishes came true.
And really, there wasn't much work that I could do. It was all, at that time, it was all controlled by the Canadian government. So if you were an adopted person in Canada at that time, adoption records were sealed, and the only way to conduct a search was to request the government do it for you. And of course, such things
amazing that you found us.
Aren't well staffed, right? So there was a 5 to 7 year waiting list to get a search performed. Although during the wait, the government moved, and I believe that adoption records are now unsealed. So at least as an adopted person, you could locate the full legal name of your biological mother and do something by yourself in terms of pursuit.
Cool. Let's see. More questions here. I'm trying not to skip any of them. Vicky Mueller, Mark, when did you know you were adopted, always or at a certain age?
I always knew, which is what I've recommended to families that I've known that have adopted other children, that it just makes it, it makes it a more natural thing. You know, it's just a part of who you are. I don't remember being told. I just always remember knowing.
Mitzi Vince asks, Mark, how did your parents handle the news of your desire to find your birth mother, and later when you discovered your existing birth family?
That's a very good question, and a somewhat difficult one. So when I started searching, I didn't actually tell them. And the reason I didn't tell them was sort of multifold. One, I didn't want to hurt their feelings, because I felt that even looking for my biological roots was an offense or could seem as a rejection. And really, there was none of that in my experience. I had a wonderful, loving family that raised me and gave me every opportunity to succeed in life. And this was really about finding my place in the world and seeing how I connected to the rest of humanity, and maybe seeing how I connected to future generations, which is also why I was, interested in looking for siblings or half siblings, hoping that if I'd learned of somebody with my genes that was procreating, having children, moving on, raising families, that I'd feel more comfortable adopting my own child versus trying to do surrogacy, which at the time seemed insurmountably difficult.
Chuck wants to know, when the two of you were still in Canada, about how far apart were you?
When we were in Canada,
As far apart as we are now,
right.
opposite sides of the country.
Yeah.
When I first met Mark, I'm Canadian, formerly Canadian, freshly American. When I first hadn't met, but was emailing him, I used to drive halfway to Kentucky. I'm in North Carolina, to meet like my parents for lunch or my brother, which is about a 4-hour drive. It's annoying, but you can do it. And I remember emailing him and being like, oh my gosh, maybe we could drive halfway and meet for lunch. And Oregon is like over here, and North Carolina is way over there. And he was like, honey, look at a map. Like I didn't represent myself well in that regard. I got super excited, and he was like, we are as far apart as you can get, almost. But it was the same in Canada. He was raised in the East and I was raised in the West.
Oh, funny. Reverse. Let's see. Liz says, the position Rachel was in is very much the position most adoptees are in. We don't have a choice. We know someone's out there, but we don't get much of a say in whether we talk to our bio family.
That's hard.
Yeah.
But I have a friend who has an open adoption, and she finds it very hard. Her child was adopted in an open adoption. And I think all of it is like, there's just feelings everywhere. And I think to Mark's point, like people ask me sometimes, what did the twins, do they know about how they were conceived and born? And like, it's just part of the story. Making it part of the story from when you're young, I think, is, like he said, it makes it part of your life. Like it's just me. I have X, Y, Z characteristics.
Yeah. I think there's no adoption situation that's easy. There's always tremendous sacrifices and tremendous bravery and risk. And, there's a lot of people that are in impossible situations that end up, adopting or giving a child up for adoption. And one of the reasons why I liked writing this book with Rachel is that I think it gives hope to those that haven't made contact yet, that, the stereotypes that when you find your roots, you're going to find something you don't want to see, like somebody with a severe drug problem, or somebody whose life has been extraordinarily difficult, that there are beautiful things to be found as well.
I think from a couple of different questions, I can see there's a little confusion around the, were you adopted by a Canadian family? Reno wants to know, and Chuck, so how did you both of you end up in the US?
Yeah, so family was in Canada. So the adoption took place in Toronto, from Toronto to Toronto. Marilyn Marilyn moved into this house for wayward girls, for lack of a better phrase, and gave birth to me. And I was put up for adoption in the city. And then she married Steve and moved west to start a new life in Canada. And then they ended up moving, and Rachel, you can speak to this more accurately than I can, but they ended up moving to the US essentially for work as part of their church. I ended up coming to the US for graduate school and meeting Tina, who I fell in love with at graduate school, and got married and stayed here.
All right, makes sense. No other questions in the chat at the moment. Anyone else have any questions?
Rachel, you had a second reading that you could do, a real short one to just, I don't know, lighten the mood.
I did have a real short one. I was busily trying to find it while everyone was talking because I forgot to find it before now.
Nice.
So I do.
There was another question from Meg. Should we do that, or are you ready?
Yeah,
Rachel?
do Meg first. Also, I did ask my glorious husband to bring me more wine. He's staying off camera.
Bartender,
He's so
come on.
nice.
So Meg asked, was there anything that either of you learned about the other while writing the book that you had never discussed? Oh, that's a good question.
Lots of things, actually. I don't know if that's true for Mark as much as it is for me.
I think that what I learned was that these people, meaning the Elliott siblings and Rachel especially, were really my siblings. So the process of the surrogacy was a tremendous way to get to know somebody. That's certainly about as intimate as friends get. But that's that's almost a trauma, right? It's an experience that each other through that experience. It's like the bonding of the first week of college, where you're thrown into a situation and you cling to each other and you make it through, and now you feel trust and comfort, but you don't really know the person yet. And I think for me, the process of writing the book and really of pestering Rachel over and over again to make sure that she was still writing.
One over would have been fine.
I think it's at least two.
I learned a lot more about Mark by reading what he wrote, because I'm sure you are surprised, an outward facing person. My feelings are outward facing. My words are outward facing. I am an outward facing person. And Mark is an inward facing person. And his feelings are on the inside. And he wrote so beautifully about things we had never talked about. Because to me, your feelings should be on the outside. And if they're not on the outside, then it's fine. I'll just fill the space with my feelings. I mean, it's true. It's terrible. And I'm working on it, but it's true. But so getting to read his writing, because we would send chapters back and forth. And I remember several times being like, I had no idea this was going on. I had no idea this happened. Thank you for sending me this, because I didn't expect it to be a book. I thought we were just like sharing our memories. And I'd be like, thank you for telling me. Like, I didn't know that part. And I don't want to tell you guys what all those parts are, because they're some of the best, most beautifully written pieces in the story. But there were several things that I read that he wrote that surprised me. And I would agree, like we went from being in the trenches together, because we very much were during the pregnancy in the trenches together, to being closer to what I would imagine having a big brother in high school while I was in middle school would feel like. A little bit of like, I'm a little better than you. I'm doing better than you. I'm doing the work more than you. a lot of like encouragement and support, and it was wonderful, and it kept us connected. Like immediately we were connected because we were new, and then we were immediately connected because of the pregnancy. But we live on opposite sides of the country, and travel is expensive, and families get like busy, and summer break, and who's got this and who's got what, and I don't have vacation days. But it was something that we couldn't become complacent with each other. And that was a beautiful gift, because he persisted in being someone who pushed this forward. And I really appreciated that.
I saw that Fred asked, what made you decide to be a surrogate? And I should clarify for people that Tina and I had been looking into surrogacy and had looked for a surrogate before, but when I made contact, the experience of meeting these siblings was so powerful that I didn't want to muddy the water. So I had no intention of ever asking, or at least not in the foreseeable future at the time of asking Rachel, even though we knew that she was in a life situation that was amenable to it.
So I didn't want to be a surrogate. I never ever wanted to be pregnant again. I never ever wanted to have more children. It never occurred to me. And then I met Mark, and I heard that he and Tina were considering surrogacy. And honestly, it sounds so flippant, and I really don't mean it flippantly, but I thought to myself, I could do that. Like, how hard can it be? I've been pregnant. Like, it's fine. I could do that. Whatever. And some of it was naivety, but most of it was love. It was like, I love him. And just to backtrack a small bit, when we first met, one of the conversations we had was that Mark never had a sister. And so I was like, hey, I love you. And he was like, that's weird. That's weird. There's this woman who is not my wife or my mother telling me that she loves me. And I was like, no, I really do. I really love you. And he was like, that's so weird. But I was like, he's like, I don't know how to have a sister. And I said, that's okay. I'm great at being a sister. I'm really good at it. I only have been a sister my whole life. I'm a professional. And so there was something about, he's so my brother. He's so, from the moment I saw his face for the first time, I was like, yep, you are clearly my brother. I love you as much and as immediately as I love my other brothers. I have no reservations here. It didn't occur to me that he didn't know me, or I didn't know him, or we lived on other sides of the country, or there were questions. It was just, I loved him and I was going to do it.
Nice. There was another question earlier from Chuck. You were talking about, and you have talked about the book, originally starting out like as Google Docs and just kind of sharing stuff with each other. And then was there a point at which you're like, okay, yes, this is going to be a book? Or was that like a just gradual thing, like, hey, we've got enough for a book? Or how did that happen?
So I'll let Rachel take a sip of her wine.
Because I don't know the answer to this question.
I think it happened fairly early in the process. So that the whole thing was 12 years to today, I think, from when we started writing portions. And all the time, the story is so fantastical. And here I'm giving credit to the story, not necessarily any of the role players in it, but the story itself is really nice, is really wonderful. And people, whenever they heard it, all of them would say, oh, you should write a book. And I would respond with, well, I'm an engineer, I'm not an author. And at the same time, I was writing some stuff down, mostly for the girls to, they had such a unique origin story that I wanted to have that somewhere where they could see it and reflect on it and know it as they grew up. And, we started piecing it together. And Rachel is a wonderful writer who would write in bursts, and the pieces just started to assemble. And I think I had this epiphany at some point that I had all of the correspondence between the family members as we first met each other. And I thought about how powerful I found it and how other adopted people who went looking might find some hope or some value in it. And I thought about just publishing the letters. And as I looked at the text and reread them, I realized there was so much of the story missing. And then I realized that, some of the stuff that Rachel and I had been passing back and forth were really the pieces that were missing, and that we should and could build a book around that, which was probably 3 or 4 years after the girls were born. So eight years ago. And then many thanks to all the people that helped edit my, I write in passive voice engineering, scientific paper type language, which is almost unbearable to read. And so go ahead.
Someone took 5,000 exclamation points out of my writing.
Yes.
So
That's
it wasn't
awesome.
just you who needed help, for the record.
Yes. Good to
It
have
seems to-
editors.
It seems to be like perfectly complement the inward facing and outward facing, like, okay,
Right.
come out a little bit, and then whoa, back off a little bit there. And then
Exactly.
exclamation marks.
You're exactly right, but we were silly enough not to co-author the same chapters. So there are chapters that are 100% Rachel, and there are chapters that are 100% me. And really, if we collaborated more
together.
closely, the writing would be more balanced. So apologies to anybody who gets a little dizzy reading with the dramatic change of voice from chapter to chapter.
I'm sure that makes it more fun to read, though, to get your voices really on the page there.
Yes, and thanks to Brad Urban and then the babies were had by Rachel.
And then
That's perfect.
Nice.
exactly.
All right, well, we're coming up on 6 o'clock.
So
Any closing thoughts?
if there's no closing questions, there is a great little nugget of a chapter that Mark and I talked about kind of ending with or encoring with or
Please
having
do.
a final thing, but we'll,
Go for it.
Yeah.
okay. I mean, I say it's great, not because I wrote it, but I'm just saying. There's this thing that whales do, echolocation. It's the way they sing underwater by using sonic pulses to tell where the other whales in the pods are. And it's how they keep track of one another. Email became my sonic pulse. I couldn't let a day go by without sending my song out into the cyber ocean. I needed to know that Mark was still there, still real. We were separated by thousands of miles. North Carolina to Oregon is almost as far as you can go. And we had not yet met. And I carried a small but real fear that once again he would fade before my eyes. In one of our early emails, he sent me an invitation to use the Google Talk IM tool. Very fancy. I immediately signed myself up, wanting every possible link I could get. And once I had gone through all the confirm your password stuff, the IM box opened on my desktop, and there, under contacts, was Mark MacDonald. Terrifyingly, his button was green. He was online right at that moment. And it was entirely possible that he was looking at my green button. And I was paralyzed. The prospect of real-time conversation had left me flushed and shaken, and I just stared at the screen. I couldn't get over the fact that he was right there at the other end of that connection. As I sat, trying to will myself the courage to type, a small bell sounded and a dialogue box opened. And it read, "Boo." And just like that, the spell was broken. I laughed out loud and thought that a more perfect opening line could not exist. And that was the first real-time conversation Mark and I ever had.
That's great. Good way to close the evening too. Thank you both so much for sharing that. It was really great. And thanks everyone for coming.
Thank
So
you
many
for
voices
coming.
here.
Thanks everyone for coming. We really appreciate your support, but both now and over the last 12 years, and many of you played critical roles to helping make this happen right from the start.
I see some of you here and I appreciate it.
Yes.
All
Thank you
right.
so
Thanks
much.
everyone. Have a really good night.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.